if we look at the how in the old country how they sift the wheat, obviously they have separating the stalk from the grain.
Yep.
That's one of the process. But there are also other ways that they put all the grains on the ground and the animals walk all over it to crush it.
And then they sift it.
And then they sift it. But you know, obviously there's two kinds of sifting in a sense. The community as a whole, but mainly, first of all, the person. Because if the person falls inside, then all the communities will break apart. And so I think that when he said plural, he tried to separate people. And but first of all, you separate each person within himself, and then the goal is achieved.
The sifting means, you know, also the choosing the right one.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's a testing in a way of your size, of your weight, whether you kind of remain within it or you just fall through. So this kind of now, I mean, uh, the enemy has a chance to sift you at, you know, at how you stand or what you're really worth for. So before, so to say, Jesus kind of covered them. And as we remember, they had that weaknesses all the time, even in his own presence. When they kind of, after his revealing about his passions, they start to, in Luke, I believe, we read that, they start to quarrel who is the most important among them. You know, that's such a pity, human things, but somehow they were covered by Jesus' presence. From so those were temptations that emerged from their own hearts. They didn't go far. They wouldn't be able to hurt them because they were sheltered. But now he's living them. That's what he says in his you know, particular in his sermon, not a sermon, but revelational in discourse at in John. So, and here you are on your own. So you're going to be tested. And Peter happened to be tested the most, right? Because he made himself to follow. Everybody left, besides the beloved disciple that he's described in John. We don't have that presence anywhere in other gospels, by the way. Luke doesn't speak about John present there, because kind of Peter was the most visible kind of personality and played important roles because of it, still plays, you know, within the community of the disciples. So Jesus prayed for him especially because he renounced him. So that's how I see these things. I don't know whether definitely some there's some more in it, but you know, I invite you to think about it. We were coming back to the discussions that just started the last time when about the Jesus words, which we found only in Luke, that Satan asked to sift you like a wheat. But Simon, I prayed for you. And he doesn't call him Peter, he called him Simon. Do you remember?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That was odd.
he's not a boulder. He's not a rock any longer. He's just a human, He is a rock as far as it is given to him. But on his own, he's Simon. So he kind of natural man, so to say, man before and outside of this special grace that was given to him to be Peter. Okay, so if you want to add something else, we can do, or we can go forward. Listen. Then maybe let us start in Gethsemane and look, and then we'll compare it. It's 22. Let's read verses 39, 46, Mary.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not enter into temptation." And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, and knelt down and prayed, saying, "Father, if thou art willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done." And there appeared to him an angel from heaven, strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down upon the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to his disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, "Why do you sleep? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation."
Thank you very much. First of all, we have this inclusion about an angel. It's interesting that first of all, we found it only in Luke.
Mhm.
Then not in all versions of Luke. And some translations simply omit it because they say it's late only in late manuscripts. But late are really late. But in the same time, we don't know because, we don't have the earliest. We cannot say, if we had, let's say, 20 manuscripts, and we know that there were only 20, no more, and they were kind of exactly attributed to particular time, that's this one first, that's second, that's third, then we can say. But even that will not give us complete picture, because we know that even if it is copies, it's not originals. It's not the original. It's just copies. Now, actually, my personal view is that, that definitely shows, how to say, the fullness of his human, not weakness, I would say, but humanity,
Vulnerability.
in its utmost, because about this, we don't very often see the sweat as a blood. Olga, by the way, may tell us about the story in Liskov with a similar similar effect. But otherwise, I never heard it anywhere else. But it was expressing the utmost, this Gethsemane struggle. I found it extremely powerful and very, very humane in Luke. And I think that some manuscripts were afraid of it, and maybe they omitted it because it was not found in other synoptics. But we remember that it was not that easy for the church, early church, to acknowledge the existence of two wills in Christ. First of all, monophysitism was very strong, that in Jesus only one nature, and that's divine. But then, when it was eventually overcome by the church, that no, in him was two natures. It's in Halcyon, and these natures were, was just joined, but in its fullness, in the unity of personality, hypostatic union, which actually was coined later. But then another conviction took place in the church, which called later heresy. But at least he had one will that's a divine will. And then this prayer in Gethsemane, so your will be done, but not mine. As we realize, in the Trinity, there is only one will within the Trinity. So Jesus always is obedient to his Father as a son. But as a human being, he has his will. And that's a manifestation of it. So it is very possible that those who were aligning toward this, monophilitis interpretation, which is very strong, by the way, it was very strong. Now we have completely different.
Monophysitism. It's about natures, not about ethnos. Монофизитство — это не монофилитство.
No, I made the distinction between it, Olga. You just I told it about monophysitism and then about monophilitism, which came as a 200 years later, and associated with the name of Maximus the Confessor. No, that we learned in the seminary very well. So, okay, now. What do you want to say on that? So it is just Luke's addition, not addiction, Luke's version. So his prayer and the answer to his prayer, and actually, we believe that that each one of us has his or her guardian angel. And who knows, in a time of temptation or whichever we go through, some kind of testings, of our humanity and will, isn't there an angel who strengthens us? Sometimes you don't, how I'm going to go through it. Surgery or something, and then you go, all right, I'll go, and it goes through. It might be that angels is with every one of us, but we don't simply kind of perceive angels' presence and protection and help at that time. But here it is recorded, and the angel came and strengthened him. But interesting that all of the evangelists, they recorded the presence of three disciples. Do you want to read the parallel with Matthew? Let's say Matthew and Mark, similar, slightly different. Let's read Mark 14:32-42. Why I'm talking about Mark? Because Mark looks like more, in this sense, more detailed, and his gospel is shorter, so he gives kind of, he wants to give more detail to the scene. I'm not talking about John. John will give us even more so, but let's do it. Mary, Mark 14:32-42, 10.
And they went to a place which was called Gethsemane, and he said to the disciples, Sit here while I pray. And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch. And going a little further, he fell on the ground and prayed that, if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible to thee. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what thou wilt. And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough, the hour has come, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand.
Yeah, so it's similar, the same, almost verbatim in Matthew. So, so he wants to rely on his closest disciples, who were with him on the Mount of Transfiguration. And he particularly addresses Peter, because Peter plays kind of his role, not emphasized, but maybe emphasized even in Mark as a personal friend. In Mark, particularly, Jesus stays in his house, so on and so forth. In Matthew, also he stays in his house in Capernaum when tax collectors addresses Peter about taxes on the temple, and he comes to Jesus and he asks him who is paying taxes, children or or those who are let's say citizens of the country. So children are not paying. So, and he sent him to get a fish. And so it is very close personal relationship. They all record on this. Luke will do it somehow, even more in one particular passage that we will read during this trial. One particular detail, very telling detail. But here, what we have, the three, and they cannot stand. It's a long night, Paschal Seder, nighttime. So they don't know what's going to happen. They are not aware what is going to happen with their teacher. They don't expect that it's going to be right now, right here. They don't know, Judas' plans, about Judas' betrayal. Jesus says in John, one is going to betray me, but when and how, in which form, they have no idea. It will take them completely, unprepared. And then this repetition 3 times he asks, and also they all say he falls on his ground and pray. So because he sees all details of what is going to happen to him from the beginning to end. He knows and he goes into it. But before, that's the main argument of those who were refuting the monophilistic interpretation of Jesus. No, he is a man. He is a just human being like all of us. He's afraid of death. Why? Because death is horrible for living. You're living and all of a sudden you're not. You know, you cannot even imagine. We know ourselves as living creatures. That's our own experience. We know that we are, we know what sickness is. We know how we are weak, but not to exist. It is actually, we know objectively that such thing exists. It happens with others. Others die. But how can I die? It's what does it mean? What does it mean? But Jesus knows what does it mean. And he knows and he sees it. So, and he is life itself, which agrees to die. It's oxymoron. Impossible thing. So he's in, and then, that's his disciples, 3, the most closest one. In Matthew and Mark, when he says, you're still sleeping and taking your rest. Well, the Son of Man, rise. My betrayer is at hand. That is Mark. Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation. It's softer. It's a little softer in Luke and this things, but it's interesting that he is alone. The appearance of angel in this scene is that he is completely alone in front of his test, in front of his things. No human support. Everyone gives up, and eventually even Peter. So, we just lived through, the Holy Week. Now it's Easter. So, but to understand Christianity as, first of all, complete failure. Christ as in human and earthly term, you go through complete failure. Sometimes you say, okay, you'll die, but your work will remain. But here's the disciples. If you really understand what's going on and just make a little effort of imagination, you clearly see how absurd will be the statement that the disciples later, after his death, invented his resurrection. For what purpose? And still doing it for 2,000 years, fighting between each other to death. What purpose? It's absurd. And it's, first of all, it's humanly impossible. It's absolutely humanly impossible. You can take, let's take a doctrine, let's say Marxist doctrine. Well, it doesn't depend on Marx at all. Proletariat against capitalists. Proletariat is always here, capitalist is always here, whether Marx is alive or dead. Now, that's the whole philosophy of it. So, if you work out to get, proletariat against capitalism, that's your doctrine. You are Marxist. But does it depend on Marx? No. Whether he is alive or dead, and so on and so forth. But with you, it's completely different. He didn't give any tool in his, to live and survive. Besides absolutely absurd one, love your enemies. They bomb you and you love them. And who does it? Do you see anybody? Who loves the bomb falling on a person and then running to kiss the one who drops this bomb? So, it is so, teaching of Jesus is plainly speaking, is absurd. To say him as a teacher, we'll follow him as a teacher, is absurd teaching. Unless he's risen, unless he overcome it from completely different perspective, from above. We don't know even how. But this we see the human feebleness in its fullness among his three, the most close disciples who were with him on the Mount of Transfiguration, who saw Moses and Elijah talking to him. And it was Peter who said, let's put 3 booths here. That means 3 little chapel. You know, now we see that you. So they kind of, in a way, were ready to worship him already. Not that long ago, actually. Because in Mark, the time was very, 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 very close, you know, and even in John. And so no one gives chronology of events of Jesus' life. It may take 3 years and may take 1 year. So everything was, but now they are overcome by human tiredness, you know, tiredness. So they, and Jesus is here alone and prays with his sweat like a blood. Such a, you know, straining himself to take it. So it's like a human, it's an enormous human will that wants to follow the divine plan for himself. You know, Paul kind of writes about it in very, very also strong, humane terms, you know, that he, and he cried out, you know, in the last hour and was heard, you know. So the humanity, the complete, you know, struggling humanity. All right, I'm talking too long. Go, we can go on. 47, 53 in Luke.
While he was still speaking, there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said to him, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?
That is the only thing. Also, everywhere says about Judas and how he comes, and Judah come in Mark, and when he came, he went up to him once and says, Master, and kissed him, and then they had laid him. In Matthew, Hail, Master, and he kissed him. Jesus said to him, Friend, why are you here? So Jesus is also very troubled by this treason.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one of the 12 with a kiss. You know, it's you know, he sees the basest of human baseness, so to say, in his own disciples. One is a betrayer. For what reason? For what is kind of money? But then he kind of, it's ridiculous, ridiculously, and then weaknesses, others. Everyone will run away in a second, but Peter and so on and so forth. But what Jesus, now Judas said, friend, he said to him. Judas, here he said, Jesus said to him, friend, why are you here? Is this, you know, why are you here? And here he said, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? So it's all human. Here, you know, it's about betrayal. We don't betray God, we betray each other. Human, it's a human thing. Okay, what? Let's continue. Sorry, I just interrupted you with this kiss story, and then we go to 53, the whole thing.
Okay. And when those who were about saw what would follow, they said, Lord, shall we strike with the sword? And one of them struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and healed him.
Okay, it's interesting. It's interesting that only in Luke there's a healing of the ear fallen. Now, let's say John is even knows the name of this slave or servant. Then in John 2:12, 10, that's chapter 18. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. The slave's name was Malchus. Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which the Father has given me? So, also, this is mentioned in all three, but only in Luke, he gives a detail that he heals back. So he performs his last miracle
Mm.
in the moment of his arrest.
Oh, that's-
And it's, in the line of his healing, that's healing miracle. One of his disciples, wanted to do it. So that was Peter. And he took it at night. It's interesting. He wanted to get him on his head, but fortunately just, the sword slided, and so he cut his ear.
Mm.
Jesus said, no, stop it. And healed. He took here, put it back. So in front of them, in front of those who arrested him, he came. So it's
Mm.
detail of also quite significant detail. And then we can
It
go.
also, I think we need some, instead of all of your emotions and grammar, we need some precision about what's so striking about it. It's that it's in a complete contrast, diametrical contrast to his vulnerability about himself. He has the power to heal all others when he renounces his power to heal or save himself from death. So it is a very important detail, much more than just his moral benevolence or love or the notions that they may notice that he, after all, is the Son of God, but the fact that he doesn't apply this ability to heal to himself. That's what's most striking.
That's a very good point, because even it is in Luke that there will be two criminals, and one of them say, will cry with others, you saved others, save us and yourself. So it's this topic, this point of his ability to heal before his arrest was played out in a mockery way.
No, I think it's not just before his arrest, it's at his very arrest. He's already showing absolutely no resistance, no might, no ability to overcome, his own kind of freely chosen human limitations.
That's a very good point. And I'll read for you the parallel passage in Matthew. Okay. And behold, one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his ear. It's in Matthew 47, 26, 51 to 54. Then Jesus said to him, put your sword back into its place, For all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? But how then should the scripture be fulfilled, that it must be so? At that hour, Jesus said to the crowd. So it's interesting what you said, that he kind of he specified that, emphasized that too, his ability, even in this very moment, to change the whole course of future history. No, all right. I just came to you guys. I saw how it works here. Bye-bye. I'm going. Angels will finish with you, and I'll come back. I'll go there without cross. But it's interesting. You know what? It is not just one of the leader was important leaders of Orthodoxy in the past century. Actually, Metropolitan Antoni Hrapovitsky, who was a founder, so the first of the Church of Abroad, the Russian Church of Abroad, and still, he kind of expressed his opinion, but theological opinion, insistingly, even before revolution. But then that actually the cross was not necessary. It was not, it was just a moral example. Yes. Father, yeah, it is, but we're not talking, we're not going to talk to this part of the history of the modern church and theological debates around that. But it is interesting that even in the mind of the church, and the church followed it, this kind of redemptive power of this sacrifice, which is in the very heart, by the way, of our religion, because we participate of the body and blood. How can we do it if it's not shed, if it's not spilled? Even that was questioned in the mind of the church. No, it's just a moral example. You must follow me in this sense. You must take your cross and so on and so forth. But it's not necessary. For Jews, it's necessary. So he said, you know, it's how otherwise the scripture will be fulfilled, how the whole plan will work out if I don't take it. Okay, Olga, thank you.
I think it's not just a question of the plan, you know, it's some kind of a reductionism of, you know, school theology. What is much more important is what Christ is coping with at this moment. He's coping with our own free will. That is exactly why the only way to redeem us without ever bending or violating it is at his own expense. I think it's really important for us to appreciate the huge price of it, as Paul says. It is that it's not just a plan.
No,
it was preordained, you know, it's old school theology, all of that terminology.
Yeah.
What matters here is that it is the only divine plan that will not violate our willful plans. He was kind of stuck with it because what he was up against was our own freedom. The only way you could express your might under the circumstances is by complete vulnerability, because it becomes clear why you know, you can heal others but not yourself, because you can heal others as God, not violating their freedom. But the only way not to violate your freedom and to change the human, to transform and liberate the human nature from within is to become one of us and do it within yourself for God. So it is tremendously important why precisely he had no other choice but to go on the cross, because everything else would violate his love for us. For our freedom and respect for it.
Okay. Let's go back to Luke. And he touched his ear and healed it. Now, 52 and on to 53.
Then Jesus said to the chief priests and captains of the temple and elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay your hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness."
Yes.
Hmm.
By the way, it's very interesting detail that Luke gives here. In Matthew and in Mark, at that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, and Jesus said to them, "Have you come out as against a robber?" Now, what is mentioned before? That there was a slave of the high priest. What tells Luke here? Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come up against him, you know, it looks like very particular plot as Luke describes it. Even high priests came here with it's their close retinues. You know, some officers of the temple. It's a totally, completely people, not just a crowd. High priests themselves, according to Luke, came here to oversee how, you know, they actually, I don't know whether it's true or not. I mean, I'm not doubt in the truthfulness of Luke's testimony. Others doesn't speak of it, but to imagine the importance of it. If you know the high official, let's say there's some kind of a a priest or preacher, particularly important, in Russia, somewhere, or kind of, and they decided to arrest him, and so some officers of KGB and the Patriarch Cyril comes to himself to do it also, to supervise the action of arrest. High priests here in Luke came together to see that it is done properly and quietly, and that they would not make any mistake. So it's interesting that from the beginning and the end, it is a design of the top hierarchy, how we're going to do this away with him. Such an important, it's for them it was, as we would say, important project to arrest him properly. Because anywhere, so the band of soldiers, their captains, and the officers of the Jews seized Jesus and bound him in Matthew. In Matthew. Only Luke gives this interesting detail that high priests came to. And then, according to John, they will let him to the to house of Anna, was just close, nearby. First of all, we have to realize that it is a very close place when he was arrested. Gethsemane and, this mountain where the palace of the high priest was. It was not a long ride, but you have to go there. It is really very close. I stayed there. I saw from it's this little monastery. You can see just across the valley. You have to see this. You see the mountain, Temple Mountain. So on this side, there's a little church. The cry of the crow. Crow.
Cockerel.
Cockroach.
Mish, rooster, Mish.
Rooster.
It's actually not very close because it's across the valley.
Yeah, it's across the valley, but also
It's not very close. I mean, you could see it from another mountain or another slope, but I have walked it numerous times. It's not very close, and I've walked it several times as a procession, which Jesus followed, because that's a procession they do in the church when they do the 12 Gospels. In fact, I went to the Russian church abroad for those purposes, and we walked straight from Gethsemane to there. And no, it's not very close.
not very close.
It's not very close, no. If you just do it physically, if you don't look at it from the other side, but you see the whole trajectory through the valley, it is quite a procession.
It's quite a procession. Okay, maybe, but it's still, even more so. It is quite telling, if it's true, that also chief priests were present there. And he said to them, have you come against this robber? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me, but this is your hour and the time of darkness. So he said in let's say in Mark, he says this to the captain, to them, yes, to those crowd. It's not specified which crowd it was. And look, it's specified. The high priest came, and the slave of high priest. Why the slave will be here? Why he was mentioned as a slave of a high priest? Particularly because probably he was close to him here. It's interesting. I mean, but it gives us a very graphic picture how it all took place. Okay, do you want to say anything, or we can get on? And look, it's shorter than in Mark, but it is just for the synoptics. Okay, you can do 54. Yeah, we're to 53. Oh, let's do it 54 to 71. The same chapter, Mary.
And they seized him and led him away, bringing him to the high priest's house. Peter followed at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard, they sat down together. Peter sat among them. Then a maid, seeing him as he sat in the light and gazing at him, said, "This man was also with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man was also with him, for he is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are saying." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus mocked him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and asked him, "Prophesy. Who is it that struck you?" And they spoke many other words against him, reviling him. When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together, both chief priests and scribes, and they led him away to their council. And they said,
Okay, sure. Go ahead. And they said,
"If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God." And they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." And they said, "What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips."
okay, now let's divide it on pieces, because first of all, so we all read about Peter's denial and its nonsense, but only in Luke there's a very interesting detail. How? And the Lord turned and looked at Peter in this very moment. When the last time he said, "No, I don't know him," Peter was not thinking maybe too much about the dangers that he has. He said he just came to see how things are going to proceed, And all of a sudden, he's also on the under the projector, so to say, in the light. So someone paid attention to him. Oh, you were with him. You were with him. John gives different details, and John actually is much more detailed, and his account, what we have in his account is more detailed. First of all, it said, let's say in John 13:24, first they led him to Annas, who he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who has given counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. So John makes this point. He reminds us about this counsel, about the decision. So there is a continuity in there, and they're preparing the sacrifice. So that is kind of how it goes on this line. High priest is still, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he will perform the sacrifice. Now, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. It's in us, kind of. Others don't reflect on that. For them, it is important. Peter's important point, because about him it was said that he will, he came forward in front of Jesus before, that he will follow him to the end. Even if everybody, I will stay with you. He said, no, three times. So, and then he said, no, I will be faithful. And he forgot about it completely. In Luke, he remembers when he met, and Jesus already was arrested. Was he near the window? We don't know. But he knew. And this very moment, on the same time, he was under the trial. He was humiliated, spat upon, had to answer them. And in this moment, he looked at Peter. In this very moment, when Peter said this last, he looked at him, and they met eyes. And then Peter remembered, oh my goodness, what I did. So it's Luke's detail. No one else has it. No one else. Now, how it described in John, this is another disciple. Yes, and this disciple was known to the high priest. He entered the court of the high priest along with Jesus, while Peter stood. As a young man, he was kind of not very kind of visible. Peter apparently was a big man, so he was visible, attracted attention to himself. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest went out and spoke to the maid who kept the door and brought Peter in. So obviously it's a kind of close mention. The mention of the high priest, palace of his high priest. The maid who kept the door said to Peter, "Are not you also one of this man's disciples?" Not accusation. Just, just young girl, big man. He said, what about you? And so she doesn't know what's going on, actually. She doesn't know why he arrested, why they brought him, what's going to happen. So there's no ill intention in her question, by the way. Not at all. This girl. What she has to do with all these things? Nothing. She just stays there. But he said, I'm not. No, just get out of here, girl. Get out of here. It's not your business after all. No, I'm not. Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was standing with them, standing and warming himself. Now, right, 24. Then it is discussion. What's going on? The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. So it's investigation going on. Yeah. And Jesus answered him. It's a John 18:13-24. And Jesus said, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing secretly. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I've said. When he said this, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, if I have spoken wrongly, bear witness to the wrong, but I have spoken rightly. Why do you strike me? So, and at this very moment, something is going on in the yard when Peter kind of renouncing that he know him, and then Jesus looked and met his eyes. So,
Father Michael,
yes,
I find it very interesting that the guard or the soldier said, is that how you speak to the high priest? So that to me indicates that the soldier was not a Roman soldier. Because what do the Romans think? The Romans insulted the high priests right and left. What do
yes.
they care? What do they care about a high priest?
Oh no, it was a temple guard.
Temple guard, yeah.
It was temple police.
Yeah.
They were kind of obviously they were Jews members of this whose work was just the temple police, because it's huge. You have to like we kind of employ some police when we have a demonstration.
Like Peter Palterman and myself in our church.
No, you're not that much. No. They are police. That's something. They're soldiers. You're not soldiers.
Yeah.
They have this particular function to keep the order. And it is another right. It's also another very interesting. Not interesting. Simply the irony, which you said. Why you didn't arrest me in the temple? You're the same people. You came to me once. You wanted to arrest me. It's described in John. But then, you talked and then you came back. You remember in John, there's said in chapter 8, and the Pharisees sent the officers to arrest Jesus. During the celebration of the Feast of the Tabernacles. And they came and they listened to him, to Jesus. And then they came back and they forgot about their mission. And Pharisees like, why didn't you bring him? Oh, they said, this man speaks like no one else ever speaks. Oh, you are also kind of ignorance. So they couldn't arrest him in the temple. Now they came, they were afraid of the people. Here at night they came, and that's what Jesus said to them. Okay, let's.
I would like to add a detail
Okay, go ahead.
I find to be very interesting. You usually comment on it, but only in relation to the Russian simple folk women. I think it's really interesting that in the Greek, as well as in Slavonic afterwards, the high priest is or archiereos. So it's the same word as you use in both Greek and Church Slavonic for bishops.
Archiereos, yes.
Yeah, so there is a very clear notion amongst those simple people that Christ was crucified by bishops. That they express quite often. I think it's really important for us to apply this to the here and now to realize how close we actually come to crucifying him by our upholding the sacred sense of hierarchy. Because the Greek language itself and the Slavonic afterwards testifies to that, if you use the same word. And the structure of the Orthodox Church, of course, is taken at least liturgically from the Jewish temple. So I think it's a timely reminder.
But, according to John, high priest was very faithful to his profession.
It doesn't change much. I mean, it actually emphasizes it because John is highly ironic. About as ironic as we claim that there's a continuity between them.
The Paschal lamb, and high priest, sacrificed him.
Oh yes, the high priest sacrificed him as a lamb. The high priest said that it's better for one man to die than for the whole people and everybody, and for all people to perish, etc. And John makes a huge note of it. But that's precisely because the function or the ordination or the performing the sacrifice has nothing to do with being personally right, loyal, or kind. And that's exactly what he dwells on. That, this zeal in the temple service can actually make you instrumental in, those women in Russian church are right when they say that, Archierei Christa распяли, because that's there is something that should be a warning to us, just as much as John's words in a way are, because he's very highly ironic. All of his references are internal, whether textual Jewish or temple Jewish.
Thank you. So anyone else, or we'll just wrap up for today? Okay, thank you very much, all of you, for participating, discussing, reading together.
Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is.
He's risen.
So we'll saw some of you on the Vespers and then tomorrow, God willing. Bye-bye.